I need to write this down. Maybe someone will believe me. Or maybe I just need to see the words on paper so I don't feel like I've lost my mind completely. I thought this was just another job. A paycheck. A chance to keep my head above water before the bills and eviction notices dragged me under. But the truth is, this isn't a job. It's something else. Something I should never have touched. I'm not anyone important. I'm not a cop or a soldier or some washed-up detective from a crime show. I'm just a guy who couldn't hold down a steady job, who spent too many nights eating ramen and staring at past due bills. Friends stopped calling months ago because every time I did pick up the phone, I was either asking for a loan or making promises I couldn't keep. The landlord barely looked me in the eye anymore, just slipped papers under my door like I was already gone. I was the kind of broke where you stop dreaming and just hope the next day doesn't crush you harder than the last. That's when I found the ad, buried in the back of an old classified site, the kind nobody uses anymore. Between scams for miracle pills and shady investment opportunities, there it was, night watchman needed. Old Metro line, cash paid nightly, no questions asked. My eyes stuck on that last part, no questions asked, because I had questions, too many of them, but none anyone wanted to hear. Questions about why my life felt like a dead end, why the city seemed to swallow people whole without anyone noticing. I called. The number rang twice before a man answered. His voice was flat, clipped, every word sharp like it cost him to speak. "You're interested in the job?" No greeting, no introduction, just that. I said yes. He gave me an address, nothing else. No details, no paperwork. Just an address tucked deep in the city's belly where the streetlights flickered and the buildings leaned on each other like tired drunks. My better judgment told me this was insane, that I should hang up. But when I thought of the red slip taped to my apartment door, I kept walking. The address led me to a gate I'd never seen before. Rusted iron sunk into the stone, bolted shut like it hadn't been touched in years. Above it, barely visible under the grime, the sign read, Line 6, decommissioned. The city shut Line 6 down after an accident, though no one ever explained what kind. People whispered about a train that never made it to the station. Others swore the tunnels themselves were cursed. The official reports vanished under layers of silence and bureaucracy. Waiting for me by the gate was a man in a gray coat. He looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, skin pale, eyes sunken, with the kind of face that made you feel watched even when he didn't move. He introduced himself as Mr. Keller. "You showed up," he said, voice dry and thin. He studied me like he was measuring something I couldn't see. I forced myself to nod, tried to sound steady. "Yeah, I'm here." Keller didn't smile. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. The paper was creased, yellowed at the edges. My fingers twitched as I unfolded it. At the top, written in bold black letters, were the words, "Rules for the Line 6 Night Watch." I almost laughed. Rules? For babysitting an abandoned subway station? But Keller's stare pinned me in place. His eyes didn't blink, didn't waver. Whatever was in that paper, he believed it. "You follow them," he said, voice hard as stone, "or you don't last." The way he said it, like he'd buried too many who ignored those words, wiped the smirk from my lips before it could form. I wanted to ask him what he meant by "don't last," but something in the set of his jaw told me I didn't want the answer. I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "Shift starts tonight," Keller said. 11 sharp. Be here." Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the shadows of the alley until he was gone, like he'd never been there at all. I stayed rooted in place for a long time, staring at that rusted gate. The silence pressed against me, heavier than the city above. No traffic sounds, no distant sirens, nothing. Just air so thick and still it rang in my ears. That should have been the moment I walked away. But desperation makes cowards of us all, and I was already in too deep. At 11 sharp, I came back. The gate screeched when I forced it open. Inside, the air smelled of damp stone and old rust. My flashlight beam stretched into the tunnels, but the darkness swallowed it greedily, like light was just another thing that didn't belong here. Tiles cracked under my boots. Graffiti sprawled across the walls, names and symbols I couldn't quite read. Somewhere deeper in the tunnels, a drip echoed, not steady like water from a pipe, slower, heavier, almost deliberate, like something counting its own pulse. I stopped in the center of the platform, heart hammering. The envelope felt heavy in my pocket. My hands shook as I pulled it out and unfolded the paper again. 7 rules, 7 lines of uneven handwriting, some strokes darker than others, like the writer had pressed the pen hard enough to tear through. The first one read, Rule 1. Never stand on the platform after 12:15, not even for a second. The words made my skin crawl. They didn't sound like instructions. They sounded like warnings carved from fear. And as the last bus rumbled faintly overhead, leaving me entombed in silence beneath the city, I realized Keller was right. This wasn't a job. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was survival. I stood on that empty platform with the paper trembling in my hands. 7 rules, 7 warnings. My flashlight flickered as though the tunnels themselves didn't like me reading them out loud, so I read them silently, tracing the uneven letters with my eyes. Each one felt like it had been written in desperation, not instruction. The first I already knew. Rule 1. Never stand on the platform after 12:15, not even for a second. I glanced at my watch. 11:42, plenty of time. But the way the numbers seemed to pulse under my skin made me feel like time was already hunting me. I forced myself to read on. Rule 2. If you hear a train arrive, do not step onto the platform. Do not look at it. Do not acknowledge it. I frowned. The entire line was decommissioned. No power, no trains, not for years. But the rule didn't say, if you think you hear it. It said, if you hear it. Like whoever wrote this expected the sound to come. I swallowed, remembering the whispers about Line 6, that some nights the station still ran itself. Rule 3. Never whistle inside the tunnels. The echoes don't belong to you. That one froze me. I'd nearly done it earlier, a nervous habit, a way to fill the silence. But the phrasing, don't belong to you, made my stomach twist. Whistles were just sounds, weren't they? How could an echo not belong to me, unless something else was waiting to answer back? I rubbed my hands together, but the chill in the air only deepened. I read the 4th. Rule 4. If someone calls your name from the tunnel, do not answer. It is not who you think it is. My throat tightened. I thought of Keller, of the hollowness in his eyes when he warned me. I thought of how easily a voice could fool you in a place like this. The drip of water, the shifting of air, the way sound bends underground. The rule didn't just say ignore it. It said it is not who you think it is. Whoever wrote this had heard something before. The 5th was worse. Rule 5. Always leave an offering on the bench before you go. Coins, cigarettes, something small. Never skip this. I looked toward the cracked wooden bench near the center of the platform. Its paint had peeled away long ago, leaving only jagged splinters. The idea of placing an offering there felt absurd, like something from an old superstition. But I remembered the way Keller's voice had cracked ever so slightly when he said, "Or you don't last." Maybe that's what the bench was, an altar, not to God, but to whatever kept Line 6 breathing in the dark. Rule 6, do not look at the mirrors. That one chilled me most of all, because until then, I hadn't even noticed the grimy, cracked mirrors lining parts of the wall behind the tracks. They were small, round, industrial, like the ones used for blind spots. My flashlight caught one, and for a split second, I thought I saw a movement that wasn't mine. I snapped my beam away instantly, heart pounding. The rule hadn't explained why. Maybe it didn't need to. And finally, at the bottom of the page, smudged like the writer's hand had trembled across the ink, was the last one. Rule 7. If the lights go out, count to 30. No more, no less. If they don't come back on by then, run. Run where? The tunnels stretched endlessly into black. The gate behind me felt miles away. I read the words again and again. No more, no less. Whoever wrote this had been precise, like they had tested it, like they had gone over the edge and clawed their way back, barely. I lowered the paper slowly, trying to calm my breathing. 7 rules, 7 lines between me and something I didn't understand. My flashlight trembled in my hand, and I realized it wasn't just my nerves. It was the air itself, vibrating faintly like a faraway engine humming beneath my feet. Rule 2 whispered at the back of my skull. If you hear a train arrive, do not step onto the platform. I looked down the tunnel. Nothing. Just concrete stretching into forever. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the still, suffocating quiet I'd first felt. Now it was waiting, patient, like it wanted me to believe I was safe until the exact moment I wasn't. I folded the rules and shoved them back into my pocket, but the words burned in my mind. I couldn't escape them. Each one painted a picture, incomplete but terrifying. A train with no driver, echoes that didn't belong to me, voices that wore the faces of people I loved, a bench that demanded payment, mirrors that weren't just glass, lights that held back something worse than darkness. Every part of me screamed to leave, to get out before the clock struck midnight. But Keller's voice replayed in my head, flat, certain, final. You follow them, or you don't last. And so I stayed, watching the minute hand creep toward 12. Midnight in the tunnels doesn't feel like midnight anywhere else. Up on the streets, even when the city sleeps, there's always some hum of life. A passing car, a drunk shouting at the night, a neon light buzzing above an empty corner store. But down here, beneath the weight of earth and stone, midnight was different. It felt final, like time itself had abandoned the place. The clock on my phone read 12:04. 11 minutes before the first rule mattered. I sat on the cracked bench across from the tracks, the rule sheet folded in my jacket, my flashlight balanced on my knee. Every sound I made felt amplified, the scrape of my boot against the tile, the rasp of my own breathing. I tried to stay calm, but my chest was tight, my ears straining for noises I didn't want to hear. That's when the platform lights flickered. Just once, quick enough that if I'd blinked, I might have missed it. My heart jumped into my throat, but then the light steadied again. I told myself it was just old wiring, decades of neglect, nothing more. But the silence after was deeper than before, heavy enough to press against my ribs. At 12:09, I heard it, a faint scrape, like something dragging across the tracks. I froze, ears straining. The sound was slow, irregular, as though someone, or something, was taking careful steps in the dark tunnel. I raised my flashlight and aimed it down the line, but the beam died, maybe 20 feet in. Just black beyond that. The scrape stopped when the light touched it. I waited. My throat felt dry, my tongue heavy. Then came the whisper of air, the kind of shift you feel in your hair before you hear it. A low vibration rippled through the rails, faint but steady, like the ghost of an approaching train. Rule 2. If you hear a train arrive, do not step onto the platform. Do not look at it. Do not acknowledge it. I told myself it wasn't real. There was no power to Line 6. No trains had run here in years. But the rumble grew, soft at first, then louder, like iron wheels turning in the dark. My instincts screamed to move closer, to peer into the tunnel and see. But the rule screamed louder. Don't acknowledge it. So I sat there, every muscle locked, eyes fixed on the floor. The vibration passed beneath my boots, shuddering through the tiles. And then, impossibly, there was wind, the unmistakable rush of air pushed forward by something huge moving fast. The sound filled the station, rattling the old glass light covers, making the posters on the walls shiver. My teeth chattered, though I wasn't cold. I wanted to look. God, I wanted to look. Every instinct clawed at me, desperate to confirm that I wasn't insane, that there was something there and not just the tricks of an empty station, but I stayed frozen, head bowed, eyes locked to the filthy floor tiles. The roar peaked, as loud as any real train I'd ever heard, and then it began to fade. The air stilled. The rails stopped trembling. The silence returned, deeper than ever. When I finally dared to raise my head, the tunnel was still empty, just concrete walls stretching into nothing. My pulse hammered so hard I thought my chest would split. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, though every breath tasted like rust and dust. 12:14. 1 minute left. My hands clenched the bench so tight the wood dug splinters into my palms. The rule was clear. Never stand on the platform after 12:15, not even for a second. I pushed myself to my feet, legs trembling, and stepped back toward the stairs. My body screamed to leave altogether, to climb back to the streets and never return, but some stubborn part of me refused. Rent was due. Bills were stacked high on the counter. This was the only job I had. So I waited on the stairs, half in shadow, watching the empty platform. The clock ticked past 12:15. Nothing happened. No sound, no flicker of lights, no phantom train. Just silence. For a long moment I thought maybe the rules were a joke, Keller's way of hazing newcomers. But then, in the corner of my vision, something moved. It was subtle. A shadow sliding across the far end of the platform, darker than the rest as though the air itself had thickened. My chest clenched. I raised the flashlight, but the beam sputtered and died before it reached that far. And then the shape was gone, like it had melted back into the tiles. I stayed rooted on the stairs until the clock read 12:20. Only then did I step back onto the platform. My knees shook as I lowered myself onto the bench again, the wood groaning under my weight. That's when the intercom crackled. The speakers overhead, dead for years, spat a burst of static. My blood ran cold. I stared up at the blackened box on the wall. Another burst of static, then a sound that wasn't static at all. A voice. Broken, distorted, whispering words I couldn't quite catch. My name might have been in there. I couldn't be sure. Rule 4 rose in my mind. If someone calls your name from the tunnel, do not answer. It is not who you think it is. I clutched the paper in my jacket like a talisman. My lips stayed shut. My body shook. The voice sputtered once more, then died, leaving only silence and the faint hum of the city far above. I don't know how long I sat there after that. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. All I know is that when the lights flickered again, I nearly screamed. But they didn't go out completely, and after a moment they steadied. The rules had kept me alive, at least for now. But the truth settled heavy in my chest. I wasn't alone in those tunnels. Whatever haunted Line 6 had noticed me, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. I told myself I wouldn't come back. After that first night, with the phantom train screaming through the tunnels and the intercom whispering words that didn't belong to any human mouth, I swore I was done. But swearing doesn't pay rent. Desperation has a way of dragging you back, even when every instinct screams no. So the next night, I found myself once again at the rusted gate, keys trembling in my hands as I forced it open. The air hit me immediately, cold, damp, heavy, as if it had been waiting just for me. The tunnels breathed differently at night. I don't know how else to describe it. The city above was alive, humming, grinding, choking on itself. But down here, the air had its own pulse, and it matched mine too closely. I checked my watch. 11:07, too early to feel the dread already crawling across my skin. My flashlight beam shook against the tiles as I stepped onto the platform. Nothing moved, not the shadows, not the broken posters peeling off the wall, not the cracked mirrors glinting faintly in the weak light. But silence itself felt like a trap ready to spring. I tried to remind myself of the rules, reciting them silently in my head like a prayer. Don't stand on the platform after 12:15. Don't step out when the train comes. Don't whistle. Don't answer the voices. Leave an offering. Don't look in the mirrors. If the lights go out, count to 30. They weren't instructions anymore. They were lifelines. I sat on the bench, tossing a coin between my fingers. I'd brought a handful of them this time. Offerings, payment for whatever shared this place with me. My hands ached to check my phone, to scroll through something normal, something human. But I couldn't. I was afraid the light from the screen would draw attention, afraid it would signal that I didn't belong here. Time moved like molasses. Each minute stretched until it felt like an hour. At 11:53, the air shifted, not with the rush of a train this time, but with something subtler. A soft draft pushed against the back of my neck, carrying with it the faintest trace of rot, like meat left too long in the heat. My stomach twisted. I gripped my flashlight tighter, though I didn't raise it. Somehow, I knew better than to swing it wildly into the dark. And then, it happened. A voice. Michael. My heart froze. The name cut through the tunnel like a blade, sharp, intimate, undeniable. My name. It wasn't garbled like the voice from the intercom. This was clear. Too clear. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to stay still. Rule 4. If someone calls your name from the tunnel, do not answer. It is not who you think it is. But it didn't sound like a stranger. It sounded like my mother. Her voice, the same tone she used when she'd call me in from playing outside as a kid, soft, almost tender. My throat ached with the need to respond. Michael, please, come here. The words echoed strangely, bouncing off the walls, but not the way sound normally does underground. The echo bent, like it was trying too hard to sound human. I pressed my palms against my knees until my nails dug into my skin. I didn't move. The voice came again, this time closer, just beyond the black mouth of the tunnel. Michael, it's cold. I need you. For a heartbeat, I believed it. I pictured her face, tired and pale, waiting for me just out of sight. My chest tightened until I thought it would cave in. I nearly stood, nearly took that one step forward. But then I remembered something. My mother lived 3 states away, and I hadn't spoken to her in months. She couldn't be here, not unless something had dragged her down into this hole. And if it had, then what stood in the dark wasn't her anymore. I stayed silent, my lips pressed together so hard they hurt. The voice changed then, sharper, angrier. Michael, answer me! The tunnel vibrated with the force of it. Dust drifted from the ceiling, catching in my flashlight beam. My ears rang with the weight of the sound, but I kept my head down, eyes locked on the cracked tiles beneath my boots. A scraping followed, like nails dragging along the concrete walls. Slow, deliberate. The voice hissed again, warped now, broken, like the speaker's throat was splitting apart. I know you hear me. I know you want to. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but another rule flashed in my mind. Never stand on the platform after 12:15. It was 12:12, 3 more minutes. If I left too soon, I'd break one rule to escape another, and I didn't know which would kill me faster. So I sat there, every muscle locked, staring at the floor, refusing to speak. My breath came in ragged bursts, loud enough I was sure whatever was out, there could hear it. At 12:14, the voice laughed, a low, broken sound that didn't belong to any human throat. The scraping stopped. The tunnel fell silent again. 12:15. I bolted up, retreating to the stairs just like the night before, clutching the rules in my pocket. When I glanced back at the platform, I saw something that nearly stopped my heart. Faint outlines, dozens of them, lining the far wall. Shadow shapes, hunched and waiting, their heads tilted in unison toward me. My flashlight flickered before I could focus on them, and when the light steadied, they were gone. I stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down my spine despite the cold. I understood now. The rules weren't warnings for rare events. They were guarantees. Every night, something came for you. And every night, the only thing between survival and whatever waited in those tunnels were the rules. I barely slept after the second night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice again. My mother's voice. Sweet at first, then breaking apart, twisting into something that wanted me dead. I kept telling myself I was strong for not answering, that the rules worked. But the truth was different. The truth was that I almost broke. If not for a last-second memory that she lived hundreds of miles away, I would have stepped into that tunnel and never come back. That thought haunted me worse than the voice itself. Still, I returned for the third night. I didn't want to. My body shook as I pulled on my jacket, as I stuffed coins into my pocket for the offering. I thought about calling Keller, telling him I couldn't do it anymore, but I didn't have his number. He hadn't given me a way out, only rules, and the rules weren't there to let me quit. They were there to keep me alive as long as I obeyed. The gate shrieked when I opened it, a sound like metal screaming. The station smelled worse tonight, like old water and something rotting beneath the tiles. My boots echoed against the concrete as I stepped onto the platform, and for the first time, I felt certain the place was aware of me, like the walls themselves had been waiting for my return. I tried to settle into a rhythm. Sit on the bench. Keep my flashlight steady. Don't look too long into the dark. Don't listen when the silence begins to bend. I repeated the rules in my head, clinging to them like scripture. But no matter how tightly I held onto them, fear gnawed at the edges. The night dragged. At 12:03, the lights flickered. My heart jumped, but they steadied. At 12:11, I heard distant scraping again, though this time it didn't call my name. Just sound. Sound that wanted me to think something was moving closer, even if I couldn't see it. At 12:15, I moved to the stairs. Safe. Just like the rules demanded. I thought maybe this night would pass quietly. Maybe the first two had been the worst. Maybe the rules were enough. But then, as I sat watching the empty platform, exhausted and half dreaming, I made a mistake. It was small. So small I didn't realize it at first. A nervous habit. My lips puckered and I whistled. Just a single note, soft, low, like I was trying to remind myself I was still human. It slipped out before I could stop it, echoing faintly across the platform. And then I remembered. Rule 3. Never whistle inside the tunnels. The echoes don't belong to you. The sound bounced back, sharper, stronger than it should have been. Not just one echo, but several. They overlapped, twisted, reshaped into something that didn't match the sound I'd made. My whistle had been short, human, but what came back was longer, drawn out, wrong. I froze, every muscle locked. The echoes didn't fade like normal sound. They grew, swelling, layering, until the whole tunnel was alive with whistling that wasn't mine anymore. Some high, some low, all of them dissonant. It was like a chorus of broken flutes playing just beyond sight. I clamped my hands over my mouth as if I could shove the sound back inside me. But it was too late. The echoes had taken root. Then I saw them. Shapes forming along the far edge of the platform, where the light barely reached. At first they looked like shadows, but shadows don't lean forward, don't stretch themselves unnaturally long. Dozens of thin figures pressed against the walls, their heads cocked at impossible angles, listening. Their mouths opened, though I couldn't see faces, only dark hollows where features should have been. And from those hollows, the whistling continued. My whistle, but corrupted. The lights above me flickered hard, buzzing like angry insects. My flashlight stuttered in my hand. I wanted to run, but Rule 7 screamed in my head, if the lights go out, count to 30. No more, no less. If they don't come back by then, run. The platform plunged into darkness. My heart nearly burst. I slammed my eyes shut and started counting, whispering the numbers through clenched teeth. 1, 2, 3. The whistling filled the dark, circling me, multiplying until it was everywhere. 10, 11, 12. The air grew thick, hot, pressing against my chest. Something brushed my arm. Not air, not dust. Fingers. I kept counting. 18, 19, 20. My knees trembled. Something leaned close to my ear, so close I felt the cold moisture of breath. And then it whistled. A perfect imitation of the sound I had made minutes earlier. 21, 22. I bit down hard enough to taste blood. 29, 30. The lights snapped back. I gasped, my eyes snapping open, tears streaming down my face. The platform was empty again. The figures were gone. Only silence remained. My flashlight steadied, though my hands didn't. I stumbled toward the bench, nearly collapsing. My breath came in jagged bursts, and I realized I was still clutching the coin I'd meant to leave as an offering. I'd forgotten Rule 5. Shaking, I staggered to the bench and dropped the coin onto the splintered wood. The clang echoed too loudly, like it was mocking me. I whispered an apology, though I didn't know who I was apologizing to. Then I sat back, my body hollowed out by fear, my soul thrumming with the sound of stolen whistles. For the first time, I understood what Keller meant when he said, "Don't last." Because one mistake, just one, was almost enough to end me. I should have quit that night. After the echoes, after the figures with hollow mouths whistling my mistake back at me, I should have walked away and never come back. My body shook so badly I could barely climb the stairs when dawn finally bled into the tunnels. Every step home felt like it was pulling me deeper into quicksand. But when I collapsed into bed, shaking and half mad with exhaustion, I already knew the truth. I would go back, because the rules didn't just bind me to the station, they infected me. They lived in my head now, whispering, reminding, demanding. The fourth night began with rain. Heavy sheets of it pounded the streets, but down below, Line 6 was as dry and stale as ever. The platform smelled stronger than before, a sour mix of rust and rot, as though something beneath the concrete had been stirred awake. I sat on the bench, flashlight across my lap, my hands tracing the folded paper of the rules again and again like a rosary. The air pressed against me, heavier than the rain above, and I felt watched before anything even happened. At 11:40, my boot knocked something loose under the bench. A dull clatter echoed across the tiles. I reached down, expecting a bottle cap or maybe another rusted coin. What I pulled out wasn't trash. It was a small, battered notebook. The cover was cracked leather, water-stained and warped. Pages bulged inside, yellowed and curling at the edges. I froze, my heart hammering as I flipped it open. Words scrawled across the first page in shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, it means they chose you too. My throat tightened. I flipped through the pages, each one filled with frantic notes, fragments of rules, names, drawings of symbols I didn't understand. Some pages were smeared, as if the writer's hand had trembled so violently the ink bled across the paper. One page listed the same 7 rules I'd been given, the same wording, the same warnings. But beneath them, scribbled in darker ink, was an 8th. Rule 8, do not trust the man in the gray coat. He is not your friend. The notebook shook in my hands. Keller, the man who gave me the job, the one who'd handed me the rules like they were lifelines. If this note was right, then why had he chosen me? I turned more pages. Some entries were short, desperate. The voices know me now. They almost had me last night. Offerings keep them away, but not for long. Others were almost incoherent, entire sentences crossed out, replaced with jagged spirals that filled whole pages. Near the back, one line repeated again and again, pressed so deep it tore through the paper. We are not guards. We are subjects. My breath caught. My skin crawled as though the words themselves had teeth. Subjects, not guards. Whoever wrote this hadn't been protecting the station. They'd been tested by it. As I read, the lights flickered. My head snapped up, notebook clutched tight. But they steadied again. My heart pounded as I lowered my eyes back to the pages. The last entry chilled me more than anything else I'd seen. If the lights fail, if you hear the train scream, if the mirrors move on their own, remember, it's not the station that wants you. It's them. And they're not done yet. The final words cut off mid-sentence, the ink trailing into a jagged line. The page was torn, as though ripped out in haste. A cold gust pushed against me, scattering loose dust across the tiles. I stuffed the notebook into my jacket, too afraid to leave it behind, too afraid not to. My mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to. Who were they? Why had Keller chosen me? And how many others had sat on this same bench, clutching this same set of rules before vanishing into the tunnels? Then, from the far end of the platform, a sound rose. Not footsteps, not whispers, the sound of a train, louder than the night before, deafening. The rails trembled under my boots, the wind screamed through the tunnels, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with the force of it. Rule 2. Do not step onto the platform. Do not look at it. Do not acknowledge it. I pressed myself back against the bench, notebook in one hand, rules in the other, eyes locked on the floor. The roar grew until it was all I could hear, shaking the station as though it might collapse. And then, silence. When I finally dared to breathe, something new broke the quiet. The intercom crackled to life, louder than ever. Static gave way to a voice, calm and measured, nothing like the whispers before. A man's voice. Subject MB resists memory suppression. Continue exposure. The words cut through me like ice. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. MB, my initials. Subject, suppression. The intercom hissed again, then died. The silence returned, thick and merciless. My hands shook as I wrote these words into the journal, pressing the pen so hard the tip nearly broke. Because whatever this place is, haunted station, experiment, or something worse, I know one thing now. I'm not just surviving the rules, I'm being studied by them, and tomorrow night, they'll come again.